CBS News has confirmed the Trump administration is using a pilot program to fast-track deportations of asylum seekers at the U.S.-Mexico border. The program is a joint effort between the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department. It's designed to expedite the processing of single migrant men and migrant families. However, immigration lawyers in the region say it denies migrants due process by restricting access to counsel. Joining me now from Washington is CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Welcome, Camilo. Explain this new program and how it reportedly works and how it's connected to that Supreme Court ruling in September that essentially allows the Trump administration to deny asylum to anyone not coming from Canada or Mexico or arriving in a boat, correct?
Right, Tanya. So the Department of Homeland Security has publicly revealed very little about the secretive program it is implementing in the El Paso sector. So a lot of what we know is from our conversations with immigration attorneys in that part of the U.S.-Mexico border. So bear with me, it's a little complicated. So instead of having migrants placed in the MPP program and return them to Mexico to wait there for the duration of their court proceedings, Border Patrol is detaining some migrants, including, as you mentioned, families and single men, and having them stay in Border Patrol custody, giving them a quick fear of persecution interview while in the agency's custody. And that is an important change because typically those not returned to Mexico, Tanya, have been transferred to ICE after spending a few days in Border Patrol custody. In ICE custody, Tanya, those migrants typically have access to attorneys and legal advice while they prepare for these fear of persecution interviews. But attorneys are barred from entering Border Patrol facilities. So these migrants under this pilot program do not have access to counsel during these very important interviews that determine whether they will be allowed to stay in this country.
Camilo, is that legal? Is that a legal step?
We don't know. We reached out to the Department of Homeland Security, which confirmed that they are in fact running this program in conjunction with the Justice Department, and they specifically said that they believe this program will allow them to grant migrants due process. Of course, that is contested by the attorneys that we spoke to because, as I mentioned, these migrants do not have access to counsel. And one more thing which you alluded to, the interviews these migrants are undergoing under this pilot program have a heightened standard, right, because of this regulation allowed by the Supreme Court. This regulation allowed by the Supreme Court last month renders most non-Mexican migrants ineligible for asylum. So migrants in this pilot program subject to this rule only qualify for lesser forms of protection, which require interviews with heightened standards.
Right. Let's explain to our viewers, because I think it's really important to drill down on this change. As it stands now, if a migrant comes from any country other than Mexico or Canada, so they've come through any other country to the U.S., they cannot apply for asylum. Is that right? Because they have to first apply in Mexico or in Canada before they get to the U.S.?
Essentially, what the administration is arguing is that asylum seekers should seek protection in the first country they travel through en route to the U.S.
Right.
So, for example, a Salvadorian migrant who travels to the U.S.-Mexico border first has to travel to either Honduras or Guatemala and then Mexico to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S. wants that El Salvadorian migrant to apply for asylum in Guatemala. And, of course, there's a problem there because a lot of areas of Guatemala are poverty-stricken. There is a lot of violence. There's political instability. And, of course, tens of thousands of Guatemalan citizens have fled the country in recent months.
So, Camilo, the way it stands right now, that Salvadorian immigrant or migrant, if he makes it to the U.S. and applies for asylum, will automatically be denied if he hasn't applied for asylum in those various other countries. Is that correct?
Yes, but he will still be eligible, and this is important. This is how the pilot program comes into play. He will still be eligible for lesser forms of protection, including protection under the United Nations Convention Against Torture. But again, these protections, which do not lead to a green card, unlike asylum, require a heightened standard during those interviews. And during these interviews, these migrants no longer have lawyers.
Right. And during these interviews, then, without lawyers, these migrants might not know about any of these protections, correct?
Correct. And the other thing, too, is that this is a move by the administration to fast-track this process, right? One attorney we spoke to told me that a migrant mother and her 6-month-old baby were deported within 15 days of being in the program. That is a seismic shift,
wow.
Tanya. Yeah.
So if you're seeking asylum, come by boat. I guess that's the, is that the takeaway here?
We know it's a policy, another policy of the deterrence. The administration wants to make sure that it is deterring would-be migrants, and they believe that this will encourage people who actually have meritorious claims to actually seek asylum in the U.S. But they believe most migrants who come here are economic migrants, and they believe these kinds of policies will deter them from coming here.
All right. Well, Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you so much for filling us in on all the details there. You're right, it is complicated, but you helped us get a handle on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.